Ladies and gentlemen, as Chairman of the Middle East, North Africa, and Central Asia Subcommittee, I am grateful to hold this joint hearing with the Indo-Pacific Subcommittee Chairwoman Young Kim to examine the fiscal year 2024 budget for South and Central Asian affairs. And we welcome each person here today, and we particularly are appreciative of our witnesses today. Central Asia's geographic proximity to Russia, China, Afghanistan, and Iran have contributed to its minimal economic impact globally and relative neutrality toward the malign interests of its neighbors. As a war criminal, Putin continues the genocidal invasion of Ukraine, the countries of Central Asia are in particularly difficult situation given their deep historical, geographical, and economic ties to Russia. It would seem that their relative respective governments are seeking to decouple from Russia where possible and balance their economic and security policies to respond to the realities imposed by war criminal Putin. Membership in the Putin-led multilateral organizations like the Eurasian Economic Union and the Collective Security Treaty Organization have inevitably proven to be more of a burden than a benefit. Members take on the burdens of sanctions, insular trade policies, and military dysfunction with no clear benefit. Sadly, on the current trajectory, the main beneficiary of any of the decoupling with Russia will be the Chinese Communist Party. The countries of Central Asia are rich in critical minerals, and the Chinese Communist Party has already significantly increased its predatory economic and security engagement in Central Asia. Kazakhstan, the Kyrgyz Republic, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan are all members of the debt-trapping, colonizing Belt and Road Initiative. As one of the first to recognize the independence of the 5 Central Asian states following the collapse of the Soviet Union, the United States now has a mutually beneficial opportunity to increase engagement with Central Asia, particularly Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. As democracies work to rid our supply chains of malign influence, Central Asia could play a role in diversification. The Central Asia area could present an alternative to Russian energy for our European allies. Additionally, minerals that are critical to our supply chains are largely controlled, sadly, by the Chinese Communist Party. Expansion of the United States economic and security strategies in the Indo-Pacific is critical to counter the malign expansionist threat of the Chinese Communist Party. The U.S.-India relationship is a vital pillar of our presence in the Indo-Pacific. India has achieved tremendous success as the world's largest democracy, shifting from socialism to free market capitalism. With success as comes responsibility, and India has an opportunity to expand their own manufacturing defense capabilities to protect their interests against those of Putin and the Chinese Communist Party. My father's service in India with the Flying Tigers of World War II, and as the former chairman of the India Caucus, I was born with an appreciation of the people of India. We are always hopeful America's long-term partner, Pakistan, and its significant note to recognize the developing democracy of Bangladesh, well represented here in Washington by Muhammad Imran. Following the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, which resulted in the death of 13 service members, abandonment of our allies and their families, and the creation of a safe haven for terrorists, the people of Afghanistan are suffering under Taliban rule. Women are prevented from working and girls are unable to attend school, effectively confining them to their homes. Recently, President Biden remarked that al-Qaeda is gone from Afghanistan and that we received, quote, help from the Taliban to keep the terrorist extremists at bay. The UN Sanctions Monitoring Team concluded in a report that there are over 20 armed groups and they have enjoyed a greater freedom of movement in planning under the Taliban. The administration's reckless remarks are sadly completely detached from reality. As we consider American priorities for South and Central Asia, I want to thank the witnesses again for their service expertise and look forward to their presenting their remarks. And it's a real honor for me to be now recognizing our very esteemed ranking member, Dean Phillips, all the way from Minnesota.
Thank you, Chair Wilson, for holding this important meeting, and to Chair Kim and Ranking Member Bera from the Indo-Pacific Subcommittee for joining us in this important work. As I said during our last hearing, it is our subcommittee's core responsibility to use Congress's power of the purse to guide the State Department and USAID's activities and support our diplomatic corps, and then to provide robust oversight over the execution of that terribly important work. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Elizabeth Horst and Assistant Administrator Michael Schiffer. Thank you both for being with us today. We had a wonderful conversation with your colleagues not long ago who handle Near East affairs just last month, and I look forward to engaging with both of you today on the Biden administration's fiscal year 2024 budget request for South and Central Asia. This hearing comes on the heels of the 2023 NATO summit, where U.S. and European partners demonstrated unprecedented unity and support for the Ukrainian people in their fight against Russian aggression. Russia's illegal and unjust invasion of Ukraine has done more than just strengthen the NATO alliance. It has demonstrated to countries around the entire world that Russia is not a dependable partner. I'll say it again, not a dependable partner, not diplomatically, not economically, and not militarily, and has created an opening for strengthened U.S. engagement, particularly in South and Central Asia. In fact, I believe that the Biden administration has rightly taken advantage of these opportunities by increasing engagement with the 5 Central Asian countries. Not only are these countries strategically located between Russia, China, Iran, and Afghanistan, but they are countries with growing economies, flourishing populations, and increasing interest in working with the United States of America. We must stay vigilant in our support for advancing democratic values and human rights in the entire region. I remain particularly concerned by the Kyrgyz court's decision to terminate as a media outlet Radio Azatik, which is Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty's local media outlet and a very trusted source for independent and reliable information in the country. Nevertheless, I've been pleased by regional efforts to reform and to modernize and to integrate, including through cracking down on corruption, strengthening institutional checks and balances, and advancing individual rights and freedoms. I look forward to hearing more from our witnesses today about how the United States is using this unique moment to advance our relationships with the C5. Pakistan, a major non-NATO ally and the only formal U.S. ally in the SCA region, is experiencing multiple crises at the moment. Monsoon flooding during the summer of 2022 affected 33 million people, with over 1/3 of the country's territory reportedly underwater at the height of the rainfall. This natural disaster, in combination with one of the very worst economic crises in Pakistan's history, widespread protests because of former President Khan's arrest, and increased terrorist attacks from the Pakistani Taliban, have left the country terribly vulnerable. Ensuring the future of democracy and long-term stability in Pakistan is in our United States national security interest. And I do hope to hear from our witnesses today about how the Biden administration is supporting the people of Pakistan during these challenging times. Finally, since the United States' withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021, one of the main questions I, and I believe most of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, have been struggling with is how to provide support to the people of Afghanistan who are experiencing a crushing economic and humanitarian crisis, while preventing that support from benefiting the Taliban. As of May 2023, the World Food Program projected that 28 million people, 2/3 of Afghanistan's population, will require some form of assistance this year to survive. And at the same time, I am deeply, deeply disturbed by the Taliban's crackdown on everyday life for the people of Afghanistan, particularly, as Chair Wilson has already mentioned, for women and girls who, just by way of example, have been barred from universities and public parks and face restrictions on travel without a male relative and on public dress. As the proud father of 2 wonderful daughters myself, this is heartbreaking and shameful. While we cannot and we should not recognize or support the Taliban in any way, we must work alongside our international partners to support the Afghan people and continue to advance the rights of women and girls in the country. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about how the administration is carrying out this important work, while ensuring that humanitarian assistance undergoes proper vetting and oversight to ensure it reaches the people who need it the most and does not benefit or empower the Taliban. As we look at some of the challenges facing South and Central Asia today, great power competition, threats to democracy, economic and environmental shocks, just to name a few, I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about how the State Department and USAID plan to use the requested funds for fiscal year 24 to mitigate these challenges, create opportunities, and demonstrate United States leadership and commitment to our partners in South and Central Asia. With that, I yield back, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Dean Phillips. And we're indeed so fortunate to have both subcommittees together, but such an important subcommittee. Incredible. We're so happy to be here with the Chairman of the Indo-Pacific Subcommittee, Young Kim.
Thank you, Chairman Wilson. I'm delighted that both of our two subcommittees can work together to examine the fiscal year 2024 budget for South and Central Asia. This hearing presents a remarkable opportunity for the Subcommittee on the Indo-Pacific to shape the United States' approach to the crucial region of South Asia. South Asia holds immense significance for our foreign policy and national security interests. And the 6 nations in the region face a dynamic geopolitical landscape that presents challenges for U.S. policy objectives. First and foremost, we must acknowledge the escalating assertiveness of the CCP globally, and especially in South Asia. The CCP is aggressively asserting leadership in regional, economic, and financial initiatives. It is promoting its Belt and Road Initiative, which is an effort to boost infrastructure development and economic connectivity. The most prominent Belt and Road project, the $60 billion China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC, would grant China access to the Arabian Sea, allowing a portion of China's seaborne trade to effectively bypass the Strait of Malacca, the strategic choke point that connects the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. Under CPEC, the CCP built a major port at Gwadar on Pakistan's Arabian Sea coast, coupled with a dual-use military airbase and naval facility at nearby Jiwani. Under the guise of economic development, the CCP is using its South Asian neighbors to advance its agenda and undermining the rules-based international order. Landlocked Nepal, who has relied on India for the majority of its trade and transit routes, has recently turned to Beijing for investment, and the CCP has pledged connectivity projects that will provide alternative routes and reduce its dependency on India. With the United States holding and withdrawing aid in Bangladesh due to various concerns, the CCP has seized the opportunity, leaving little choice but to lean on Chinese investment. Meanwhile, the CCP has made significant and increasing foreign direct investment in Sri Lanka and has repeatedly been the top source of foreign direct investment to Sri Lanka. Second, the CCP is intensifying up its presence both along the Indian border and the Indian Ocean. Chinese fishing vessels are engaging in illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing. Aid and cooperation play a pivotal role not only in advancing U.S. interests in South Asia, but also in enhancing their prosperity. Yet, this year's South and Central Asia budget represents 2.3% decrease from the previous year, and it remains the least funded region by the State Department. At a time when the region faces the threats of terrorism, refugee displacement, and democratic backsliding, this budget discrepancy highlights the need for greater U.S. engagement. As the CCP aims to expand its economic activity, influence, and enhance its strategic presence, the United States must respond by bolstering our diplomatic presence in the region. It is imperative that we foster greater cooperation with the 6 South Asian nations on the economic, diplomatic, and security fronts. Our first step must be ensuring that all embassies and consulates are up and running, and we must appoint and confirm ambassadors in a timely manner. Secondly, the U.S. must continue to deepen existing partnerships while also forging new ones. We must explore new avenues to expand our development and economic cooperation, maritime safety and security, and strengthen the capacities of law enforcement agencies by working bilaterally with South Asian countries. Indian Prime Minister Modi's recent visit to the United States delivered new bilateral initiatives to the table. Not only will this increase U.S.-India cooperation, but it helps set a precedent for how the United States should be conducting policy in the region. We must expand and accelerate such efforts across the region. So in closing, I look forward to hearing from our witnesses and the members from both subcommittees. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Young Kim. We now proceed to the ranking member, Ami Bera.
Thank you, Chairman Wilson and Ranking Member Phillips and the Chairwoman of the Indo-Pacific Subcommittee, Congresswoman Kim, for hosting this hearing. I'm going to keep my comments short, but I appreciate the President's FY 2024 budget because it represents the values and the importance. But I have to go on the record. Yesterday, was really disheartened to see the House Appropriations Committee Republicans pass their fiscal year 2024 state foreign ops and related programs appropriations bills with a 15% cut in funding from fiscal 2023 levels. So as we go through the budget process, we've got to fix that. In a nonpartisan way, Democrats and Republicans agree that the importance of countering China's economic coercion, the importance of making sure we have a robust diplomatic presence throughout the region, South Asia, Central Asia, Middle East, the fact that we have to have robust funding to provide alternatives to China's Belt and Road Initiative, that's incredibly important, that we have to adequately fund USAID, State Department, to have the resources to mount robust public information campaigns to counter disinformation that's out there. And that's why budgets reflect our values and priorities. And again, my disappointment in the 15% cut. And hopefully as we go through the appropriations process and the budgeting process, we will be able to remedy that and adequately fund state and USAID. In addition, I'm heartened and look forward to working with the chairman and the ranking member of the Middle East North Africa Subcommittee on strengthening our relationship with the Central Asian nations. Incredibly important right now, especially on the heels of the unprovoked Russian invasion of Ukraine. The countries in Central Asia, while not perfect countries, very much want the U.S. presence there. And on that note, have had conversations with the administration. We've introduced legislation with some of our colleagues in a bipartisan way on the Ways and Means Committee to repeal Jackson-Vanik to allow our companies to more fully engage in Central Asia, and that would be a piece of legislation that I look forward to working with my colleagues on the other subcommittee with. In addition, I'm proud on the Indo-Pacific Subcommittee, we had an earlier hearing on the Indian Ocean region, a region that often we don't pay adequate attention to. But if we look at the competition that's taking place in there, whether it's in Djibouti, whether it's increasing PRC presence in the Emirates, whether it's a presence developing ports in Pakistan, this is a place where I think our two subcommittees can also increase our presence and understanding, because this is a huge maritime region where the number of goods and services that travel through the Indian Ocean is incredibly important to us. In addition, look forward to working with the administration to make sure we get an ambassador to the Maldives, an incredibly important, there has been a nomination. There's some holdups on opening the embassy there, but I think we've got to get that done and get our ambassador in place. And lastly, as we think about the 2 decades-long war with Afghanistan, the one way we can adequately honor our men and women that served in Afghanistan is to make sure those refugees that have come to the United States, that we honor them with that service. And to that note, the Afghan Adjustment Act has been reintroduced, and I think this is an incredibly important piece of legislation. My home district in Sacramento County has the largest Afghan refugee population in the country, and we've got to give these individuals a pathway to become legal permanent residents, and the Afghan Adjustment Act does that with additional security background checks and so forth. So again, I think this is incredibly important legislation that the two subcommittees certainly should work closely together, as well as with all of Congress to get passed and sent to the President's desk. So with that, again, I thank the Chairman, Ranking Member of both subcommittees for hosting this hearing, and I look forward to the witness testimony. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Bera. And as we begin today, we can think of history, and I appreciate Congressman Bera pointing out the bipartisanship that I think you're going to see substantially, not all, here. But we began the day in a bipartisan manner. I was with Congressman James Moylan, the delegate from Guam. Today is the 79th anniversary of the liberation of Guam. And so there are things we don't want to repeat. And so, but how brave the people of Guam, who were the only Americans who actually lived under the occupation of the Imperial Japan. And so as history is being made, we need to understand and learn from history, peace through strength. With that, I'd like to thank both of our persons here today, secretaries, and we'll begin with your presentations, and then we'll go into a strictly maintained 5-minute question period. So, Secretary Elizabeth Horst, thank you. You're the Principal Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of South and Central Asian Affairs, and then grateful to have Michael Schiffer, the Assistant Administrator for the Bureau for Asia USAID. And so you may proceed.
Chairman Wilson, Ranking Member Phillips, Chairwoman Kim, and Ranking Member Bera. South and Central Asia is a region vital to our national interests. It is at the crossroads of strategic competition with China and Russia. It is where the future of 21st century economy will be written, and it is home to one of our most consequential relationships, India. The President's fiscal year 2024 foreign assistance request is $1.223 billion for South and Central Asia, providing the resources necessary for our ambitious agenda. It includes funds to expand our diplomatic presence in the Indo-Pacific, to build resilient energy markets, and to support counterterrorism and maritime security. The budget request also includes $2 billion over 5 years in mandatory funding to enable the United States to make game-changing investments in the Indo-Pacific to outcompete China. We look forward to working closely with Congress as we advance our goals in South and Central Asia. I've heard from many members on this committee that we need to match our words with our resources in the Indo-Pacific. This budget requests substantial increases in funding for the region, and I'd like to provide some examples of how we would use these funds if appropriated by Congress. India is an essential partner in the Indo-Pacific. Prime Minister Modi's state visit to Washington last month demonstrated that we are growing closer in alignment, specifically on emerging technologies and defense. Assistance to India targets energy security, supporting India's ambitious goal of 500 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2030. We appreciate Congress's partnership on India, including on ensuring that the advancement of democracy, human rights, and religious freedom are at the center of our partnership. Our Indo-Pacific assistance also enables us to work with key maritime states of Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Maldives to build maritime surveillance, counter illegal fishing, and prevent the illicit trafficking of people and goods. For example, we've provided 3 U.S. Coast Guard cutters to date to Sri Lanka using foreign military financing. And when I visited the Port of Colombo earlier this year, I heard firsthand how Sri Lanka is using these vessels to patrol its exclusive economic zone and provide security to nearby shipping lanes. Ultimately, this has helped Sri Lanka resist pressure tactics by the PRC. I know the integrity of Pakistan's democracy is a key concern to those on this committee. We firmly believe that a prosperous, democratic, and human rights-respecting Pakistan is important to U.S. interests. We use our foreign assistance to support Pakistan's independent civil society, strengthening their advocacy for reform, oversight, and accountability. I've personally talked with advocates and journalists who thank the United States for continuing to foster democratic communities and spaces. More broadly, our assistance to Pakistan targets discrete areas where we can productively collaborate with Pakistan, including on countering terrorism, promoting health, and addressing the climate crisis. Last year, catastrophic monsoons killed over 1,700 people, displaced millions, and left a third of the country underwater. The United States leadership and swift response provided substantial assistance, and a Defense Department air bridge delivered humanitarian supplies. Moving forward, our resources will focus on climate-smart agriculture, clean energy, and water management. Our assistance to Afghanistan is consistent with our continuing interest in supporting the Afghan people, protecting United States citizens, and resettling Afghans to whom we have a special commitment. We strongly and unequivocally condemn the Taliban's systemic abuses of women and girls and other marginalized groups in Afghanistan. And the United States will continue to provide assistance addressing the basic needs of Afghans where women can be safely and meaningfully involved in the aid cycle, from aid assessments to delivery and monitoring. We have carefully crafted assistance to support the Afghan people, not the Taliban. In Central Asia, we have a historic moment of opportunity. The countries of Central Asia are under enormous pressure from Moscow, which exerts significant control over energy and trade. Despite this pressure, they have refused to send troops to fight with Russia and Ukraine. They have emphasized Ukraine's independence and sovereignty and even provided humanitarian assistance to the people of Ukraine. That is why last year we launched the Economic Resilience Initiative in Central Asia. This initiative aims to catalyze transformative economic growth in the wake of Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine. And through our assistance, we're expanding alternative trade routes, teaching thousands of Central Asians English, expanding job opportunities for returning labor migrants, and helping businesses succeed and grow. These efforts demonstrate our reliability as a partner, bringing Central Asia in closer alignment with us over the long term. In conclusion, the President's budget request for fiscal year 2024 charts a clear path for engagement across South and Central Asia, and we look forward to partnering with Congress on our interests in this strategically important region. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Horst. I now recognize Mr. Schiffer for his opening remarks.
Chairwoman Kim, Ranking Member Phillips, Ranking Member Bera, Chairman Wilson, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify here today for the U.S. Agency for International Development and to speak about our role in advancing U.S. foreign policy priorities in South and Central Asia and our fiscal year 2024 budget requests. South and Central Asia faces pressing challenges with implications for countries far beyond the region, including an intensifying climate crisis, longstanding conflicts that disrupt livelihoods, and tangible threats to sovereignty in a region significantly affected by the gravitational pull from the People's Republic of China and from Russia. However, public and civil society leaders across the region are consistently signaling pent-up demand for regional cooperation opportunities and greater connectivity, improved democratic governance, and responsible stewardship of natural resources. As such, the President's FY 2024 budget request for USAID includes slightly over $1 billion, $1.03 billion, for South and Central Asia in the Development Assistance Economic Support Fund, Assistance for Europe, Eurasia, and Central Asia, and Global Health Programs, USAID accounts. Our FY 2024 budget request supports the overreaching development principles laid out in the President's Indo-Pacific and Central Asia strategies to improve resilience to health and climate threats, foster sustainable, inclusive, and transparent economic growth, and strengthen democratic institutions, good government practices, and human rights. In Afghanistan, we will continue in a very, very difficult environment to collaborate with partners on the ground to preserve the gains that have been made over the past 20 years in areas of health, education, livelihood, human rights, and civil society, with a focus on the protection of women and girls and human rights. And I want to assure this committee that USAID is fully cooperating with the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, SIGAR. We have long been and remain committed to helping SIGAR fulfill its important statutory mandate. Consistent with President Biden's deep commitment to transparency for the American people, USAID believes in the importance of inspectors general to protect against fraud, waste, and abuse. We are committed to cooperating with all oversight bodies, including SIGAR, this committee, Congress, and both state and USAID's inspectors general. Moving forward, USAID will continue to work closely and proactively to keep SIGAR, Congress, and other oversight bodies appraised of our activities on the ground. In South Asia, our request is designed to promote regional cooperation to address regional challenges. addressing the root causes of climate change, bolstering gender equality and human rights, promoting democratic institutions and transparency, fostering inclusive economic growth in the wake of COVID-19, and enabling free and open digital technology and connectivity. This is especially important given that South Asia remains one of the least integrated regions of the world. We look to collaborate with our partners in the Quad and India to leverage innovations and partnership opportunities to address regional and global threats like the climate crisis, which is already contributing to losses of life and livelihood, and global health security, persistent poverty, and socioeconomic disparities. Likewise, as Secretary Horst offered, our development assistance in Pakistan is structured to help Pakistan build a stable, peaceful, and prosperous country and to recover fully from the catastrophic floods of last year. Increasingly, in Central Asia, we find partners that are seeking greater cooperation and engagement with the United States on strategic priorities such as economic integration and diversification and the clean energy transition. Indeed, our work in Central Asia is emerging as proof that development principles grounded in pluralistic values, good governance, and economic inclusion can deliver greater resilience, diversified economies, and stability based on partnerships and participation in the rules-based international order. This request supports USAID's work with both the interagency and our host government countries to address the mounting effects of climate change, advocate for rights, freedoms, and protections, and, where possible, support activists, journalists, and citizens facing intimidation and threats. With your continued support, and on behalf of the American people, USAID will continue our central role in realizing this vision while increasing partner countries' reliance and advancing sustainable prosperity and security for communities across the Indo-Pacific. I look forward to your counsel and guidance and to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schiffer. I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes. I want to thank both of you for your opening statements. The PRC is pouring money and infrastructure projects in the region, especially in Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Maldives. So what has the administration found to be the most effective method to counter the PRC's cash diplomacy and infrastructure projects? And what are we doing to ensure that United States remains a partner of choice? I'd like to hear from both of you.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. I would start by offering that it's critically important as we think about how to compete effectively with the CCP, that we start not with what we're against, but with what we're for, what our affirmative vision for the region is, and our value proposition, and what we can offer as a development partner. We have a better development model. We have a better development model because it's grounded in robust governance institutions and vibrant and support for vibrant civil society. That's the key catalyst that allows for development engagement and economic growth to be sustainable over time. I think many of our partners in the region understand that. The main question that they have, frankly, and this is one where this committee can be critical, is whether or not we have the endurance to show up every day, meet them where they are, and work with them to solve their problems. When we have the support that we need, when we have the robust resourcing that's reflected in the President's budget request so that we can do that, we're able to be successful. We found, for example, in Central Asia, and I will be sparse on the specifics here, but happy to come back to the committee in an appropriate setting, that we have a demand signal to work with them and provide technical assistance on financial management and debt management. And they have asked us to lean in. Likewise, we've had a number of requests, and again, happy to come back in an appropriate setting, to work to make sure that American manufacturers of high-tech goods have market access and are able to provide them with the equipment and the materials that they're looking for so that they don't have to rely on other more suspect suppliers. So we have opportunities. We just need to make sure that we have the support to be able to show
I want to
up.
hear from Ms. Schiffer also for your opinion before we get into another question.
Sure. Thanks much for the
Ms.
question.
Holst.
I want to underscore what Assistant Administrator Schiffer had said about where we are offering an alternative. And this is a word that many of you used in your opening statements, and that's really an American strength. We offer an alternative model to development. And through our diplomacy, through a number of things, not only the bilateral support that we do, but also through the Quad, which is a grouping with Japan, India, and Australia, we've been able to offer a number of the countries in South Asia an alternative to what China offers. We are careful through the way we use tools such as the Development Finance Corporation, the DFC, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, and others, again, offering an alternative to the way China finances its infrastructure projects. We know that long term, we think this is where these countries will be most independent, most sovereign, and we see a good response to that as well.
I want to hear from Mr. Schiffer. What does the USAID program in South Asia look like, and how can USAID expand its presence in South Asia to help support the economic growth and support investments in food security?
Thank you. That is an excellent, it's an excellent question, and I would offer, first off, as I know you appreciate, our presence in South Asia is varied because we seek to meet our partners where they are. And the challenges that we have when it comes to food security, for example, in Sri Lanka or Nepal are very different than what we face in Bangladesh or India. The President's budget request includes $126 million for economic growth in agriculture, which is a 43% increase over the 23 request, precisely because, as you suggest, we recognize that this is an important area for us to engage, especially given some of the knock-on effects of Russia's illegal, unjust, further invasion of Ukraine. And there are real opportunities to work in the region on food security in ways that help drive economic growth and development.
Right. Thank you. My time's up. I want to recognize Ranking Member Phillips for 5 minutes for your questions.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I want to continue to dig a little deeper on Chairwoman Kim's questioning about our Central Asia strategy. Clearly, Russia's war in Ukraine, China's aggression in the region has opened a door of opportunity, I think it's fair to say, for us to deepen our engagement. I'm curious what both of you here, starting with you, Ms. Horst, what do you hear from the C5 countries about what they would like to see more of from us?
Thanks for that question. As I noted in my statement, we have a moment of opportunity with Central Asia right now. This is a time when they have shown remarkable independence, and the message that we offer as an alternative to both Russia and also China is one that's really resonating. The program that I mentioned called ARISIN, the Economic Resilience Initiative in Central Asia, is just one example where we're trying to do alternative trade routes. We're trying to increase English language training so that—
Ms. Horst, I don't want to interrupt, but
Sure.
my very distinct question is, what are we hearing from them about what they want? And maybe this intersects, but I really want to hear what we're being asked. We don't get to hear much of that.
Fair question. What they're asking for us is support on sanctions, helping them find a way that they can resist both pressures and giving them an alternative. We have engaged very much with them on sanctions, particularly in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, as a way to not crush their own economies when they are at risk. Particularly in Kazakhstan, they have had 200,000 Russians come over the border, and they're looking for ways that they can make sure that they maintain their own internal security, both in Kazakhstan and other places. So that's what we're hearing from them. They have really embraced the C5+1 format, as you mentioned, and we're seeing that as a format that is a way that we can do regional connectivity in a way that we haven't in the past.
Okay. And Mr. Schiffer, anything you want to add to what you might be hearing from any of the C5 countries?
Sure. It's a very good question and a very important one. I was lucky enough to travel out to Central Asia earlier this year with Deputy Administrator Coleman, although we went in February, and I would recommend to members of the committee that they go in the summer.
Well, Ms. Horst and I are Minnesotans, we understand.
And I would offer that we heard consistently as we traveled across the region a demand for U.S. engagement so that they had a diversity of options and that they could be connected not just to the north to Russia or to the east to the People's Republic of China, but to the west to Europe and the United States as well. They look to us to provide technical assistance. I had mentioned earlier the demand signal that we've gotten on debt management and financial management. They're looking to us to work with them to digitize their customs so that we can reduce the cost of those transactions and increase trade flows and help them to build a middle corridor. So I think there are significant opportunities.
Okay. And based on the budget and your strategies, you believe we're well equipped to fulfill some of those requests?
I would offer that if the president's budget request is met, we're well positioned to fulfill those requests.
Okay. Continue, Ms. Horst, you mentioned Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, and we all note their economic and political reform progress, also some increased interest in foreign investment and trade. Can you talk a little bit more about how we are supporting those particular efforts with countries that we believe are moving in the right direction?
Sure. It's something we've been working on for a long time, and I think we're starting to see payoffs for, particularly in Uzbekistan, where we're seeing a real reform agenda under the president. We see opportunities for American companies in a variety of ways, including in tech. We have a nascent, in agriculture as well, there's opportunities there. In Kazakhstan in particular, we've had a long relationship in the energy sector, and we're trying to work with Kazakhstan to make sure they can diversify how Kazakh energy gets to other parts of the world so it's not as reliant on Russia. That's something that's very new, but it's something that we're working with them on.
And conversely, can I ask you about Kyrgyzstan and I would argue they're backsliding, and how are we addressing that?
Yeah, we do have concerns about democracy in Kyrgyzstan. I do want to thank you and several others who helped. We have good news on Radio Azatik. As we heard this morning, the Bishkek City Court overruled the decision that had kept Radio Azatik offline, and I think that's one example where when we work together, we are able to push back and help Kyrgyzstan keep on its democratic path.
Wonderful. I see my time is expiring, so I yield back. Thank you both.
Thank you. I now recognize Representative Barr for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to Assistant Secretary Horst and Administrator Schiffer for your service. I want to start with Belt and Road Initiative question. It's obvious that the war against Ukraine has left a vacuum in Central Asia. And the CCP is clearly attempting to fill that vacuum through Belt and Road initiatives. But the administration's budget request for development assistance in South and Central Asia includes zero funding for Central Asia. You mentioned DFC, and I think DFC plays an important role, could play an important role in countering BRI. But can you talk about how the administration is countering Belt and Road in Central Asia?
Broadly speaking, again, what I'd said before is the way we attempt to counter Belt and Road is to offer an alternative, to offer a diverse way of funding infrastructure, of developing their economy, of economic reform. We think that that is the best possible way to push back against China. Our assistance often comes with strings attached, and sometimes it doesn't seem like the fastest way to go forward, but our experience has shown us that it is the long term in the best interest of the Central Asian countries.
Are you all collaborating with DFC on specific projects in Central Asia to help attract that diversity of financing, private financing away, as an alternative to China?
So we work with DFC. I don't have the specifics, and I'd be happy to get back to you about specifically what DFC is doing. But broadly speaking, across the region, we see DFC as an excellent arm that offers an alternative to the way that other countries have financed
Well,
things.
let me give you a couple of examples. There's a China-Pakistan economic corridor, which is a BRI project so far worth more than $62 billion, and Pakistan has more than $30 billion in debt to China and unable to pay. And then there's another example in Sri Lanka. According to the director of the Asia-Pacific Department at the IMF, the Sri Lankan economy is expected to contract by 3%. and the nation defaulted on its debt, but China exploited this financial weakness, engaging in debt trap diplomacy. China is Sri Lanka's biggest credit and accounts for 10% of the country's foreign debt. So is DFC's, the State Department, are you all involved in those two countries?
So in Pakistan, absolutely. The DFC is very interested in Pakistan. It has a project with a wind farm that has shown an alternative way of financing. Just a quick note on the CPEC, as we call it, the Chinese-Pakistan Economic Corridor. This is something that we have long cautioned Pakistan about, and we have said buyer beware. And several years into the CPEC, I think the Pakistanis can make their own decision on whether this was a great investment or whether they should be trying to draw for an investment that may come with strings attached but is really a long-term better bet. Same is true for Sri Lanka as well.
Thank you. And my final question relates to India. We had a great visit from Prime Minister Modi. He was well received. They're going to be celebrating their 75th year of independence coming up. We've got an excellent bipartisan delegation led by our colleagues, Congressman Waltz and Congressman Khanna, coming up in August to India. Sadly, I will not be joining them, but I think they're very capable of representing our interests there. I co-led legislation with Congressman Waltz to fast-track U.S. weapons sales to India. We know of India's overdependence on Russia for arms, and we want to create some separation there. What additional steps can the State Department take to help India get the weapons independent of Russia?
Sure. Thanks for that question. So you are exactly right that Prime Minister Modi's visit last month was demonstrating how consequential our relationship is with India. And one of the things that came out of it was this increased relationship in our defense relationship. We're looking at a number of different ways where we can collaborate on security and defense production. And this is something we work on daily with our colleagues at the Pentagon as well. This is an important area where I think, to your point, we're going to help India diversify away from Russia's defense industry.
And how fast do you think we can achieve that?
That's a question for both the Indian side and the U.S. industry. We're moving faster than you would expect, but it's probably never as fast as people want it to be.
Yeah, well, I don't pretend to speak for all my colleagues, but I can think the sense of Congress is probably that we want that accelerated.
Noted.
So with that, my time has expired. I thank the chair and I yield back.
Ranking Member Bera for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I'm thrilled about the interest in Central Asia and the importance at this moment in time. Except for Kyrgyzstan, the Central Asian nations are governed by Section 402 of the Trade Act of 1974, the so-called Jackson-Vanik Amendment. And Jackson-Vanik is an outdated Cold War relic that originally targeted the Soviet Union and aligned communist countries, which prevented the immigration of Jews and other religious minorities. In order to earn most favored nation tariff rates, the State Department must annually certify that countries under Jackson-Vanik are allowing free immigration. The State Department does so regularly for Kazakhstan without issue, as Kazakhstan has a reputation for multiculturalism and religious tolerance. However, Jackson-Vanik strains U.S. relations with Kazakhstan, a nation that is in a tough neighborhood. My colleague from Minnesota, Mr. Phillips, asked, what are they asking for? And, I've traveled to the region, and routinely the Central Asian nations are asking for a repeal of Jackson-Vanik, as, it impedes trade and investment. I'm proud to co-lead the bipartisan Kazakhstan Permanent Normal Trade Relations Act of 2023, along with Representatives Panetta, Adderholt, Titus, and LaHood. I guess, Ms. Horst, what impact does Jackson-Vanik have on U.S. relations with Kazakhstan and our ability to, and our company's ability to fully invest?
Thanks for that question, because we couldn't agree with you more that Jackson-Vanik is a tool of an era that has since passed and is no longer the tool that we wanted it to be. You asked what impact it has. It holds back the relationships that we have with these countries, and they do ask for us to repeal it. We think that if we were able to repeal it, we would then be able to offer permanent normal trade relations which would, again, to the earlier question about how can we help diversify, how can we help Central Asia push back against Russia and China, this is exactly one of the ways we do it. We very much would support graduating these 3 countries from Jackson-Vanik. Would love to do all 3 at once, but even if it was individually, we'd very much welcome that. We think there are other tools we can use to push these countries on their human rights record, and right now, Jackson-Vanik just no longer is the tool that it used to be.
Great. Well, I look forward to working with the administration to get this done. Switching, and maybe Administrator Schiffer, in early 2020, before the pandemic shut things down, I traveled to Sri Lanka and Nepal specifically because these were MCC compact countries that had MCC compacts that were having trouble getting through their parliaments. Fortunately, we were able to get this to completion with Nepal, and the Nepalese people are thrilled with the investment. We didn't have the same success in Sri Lanka. What is fascinating to me is, a few months ago, the Sri Lankans came into my office, and they now very much want the MCC back in Sri Lanka. And as I pointed out to them, it's going to be very difficult because you were awarded a compact. That said, it was also, as I was in Sri Lanka and Nepal, the disinformation campaigns about what these compacts meant and the importance of using tools like that, especially as we see the debt trap that Sri Lanka is in and the real challenge that they have. They understand that today. I guess, Mr. Schiffer, thoughts about how we should both perhaps go back to Sri Lanka and think about the MCC again. Not easy to do, but I think important to consider given where they are and the instability they have there. But also how we sell these programs and counter some of the disinformation.
Thank you for that question, Congressman. It's a really important one. I would offer that first off, for Sri Lanka, right now, our focus is in making sure that they're able to continue to perform under the IMF package that they've received that has helped to pull them back from the brink of what we had thought was going to be financial catastrophe last year. They've done a good job thus far in living up to their commitments and done a good job on debt restructuring. We continue to provide them with technical assistance and advice for that, but that is thing one. If they're able to stick to that plan, we have indicated to them that we want to engage, whether it's with the MCC, DFC, our own programs, with our colleagues at state to help them to drive the economic future that we think the Sri Lanka
The gentleman's time has
deserve.
expired. Sorry. I now recognize Representative Bera for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and appreciate the witnesses being here. My question deals with back in April, the Uzbekistan energy minister announced plans for a country to use supplies of Russian gas via the Central Asia Center gas pipeline. So the CAC pipeline runs along the Turkmenistan and Kyrgyzstan border with, and goes through then Kazakhstan. So and ends up in Russia. While there's been no official set in stone deal for the volume that is planned to be transported, this is still a clear effort by Russia to reassert their influence over Central Asia. Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan already exports about $40 million per month in gas to China, which is nearly half of their overall exports. They average around 90 million. So, however, when I looked at the State Department's budget justification, none of these energy deals were mentioned, and it seems to focus on clean energy versus what Russia is actually doing. So it was mentioned that there is an increasing need for ENR and U.S. aid to support targeted initiatives to increase energy security. So my question is, what are these targeted initiatives? And what's the State Department doing to counter Russia reassertion in the Central Asia? And why was these, and no mention of energy, Russian oil and gas, as part of the countering their influence in countries like Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Kazakhstan?
If I can take the liberty of starting, sir, it's an excellent question. It is one that I would offer both USAID and state are focused on, and we are working together to increase private sector investment and cross-border energy trade. And just to give you one little example, in this past year, the State Department provided USAID with $4 million in countering PRC influence fund funding that allowed us to create a virtual platform called the American Innovation Center for Central Asia, through which our Power Central Asia activity partners and U.S. companies have been able to install American technology in the Central Asia electricity fund or electricity system, and we have used those funds further to install a wide area monitoring system that allows for regional electricity trading platform to increase the electricity grid's stability and to make sure that American and European energy flows are also part of the regional energy portfolio.
And in addition to that, I think Russian gas is somewhat dirtier than the U.S. gas or CNG, so I think that's a factor. Madam Undersecretary.
Let me just add that you've put your finger on a problem that is very real for Central Asia, and they have 70 years worth of infrastructure that's integrated with Russia. So peeling them off from that is going to take time and investment, and that's exactly what Assistant Administrator Schiffer described. And what we are trying to do is provide alternatives. But it will take time. We are in constant dialogue with these governments about what the alternatives are, because frankly, they're worried about Russia turning off the tap. They're at incredible risk because of the extraordinary influence that Russia has over their energy and economies.
One last question for either of you. You know, can we put sanctions on the Russian oil and gas if that deal did go through?
So right now, we have encouraged countries around the world to adhere to the price cap that goes on for Russian oil and gas. And the goal is not to disrupt global energy markets, to make sure that Russia doesn't profit from its energy sectors. And that's something we've been working with countries around the world, including India in our region.
I appreciate your answers, and thank you very much. And I am always interested in making sure that our adversaries are not using these resources to support their efforts. And so thank you for your answers.
The gentleman yields?
I yield.
Thank you. All right. Now I recognize Representative Sherman for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Ms. Horst. Easy question. On July 26th, we're having a briefing on democracy and human rights in Pakistan. All of my colleagues here are urged to attend. Can we count on you or perhaps a lesser light from your bureau joining us and providing some information on those topics to members of Congress?
Absolutely. We'd be delighted to talk about what we're doing in Pakistan.
See you on the 26th. We forget how important it was to get Osama bin Laden. Here was a man who had killed thousands of Americans on American soil. What would our image be if we had not gotten him? How many terrorist attacks would he have inspired? How many would he actually planned? We sent in SEAL Team 6, 23 men. No man was left behind until you realized there was a 24th man, Dr. Afridi, a Pakistani doctor who risked his life to help us get the worst terrorist in the world. He remains behind bars. He doesn't have an American family or American fans, really, to put pressure on the State Department to get him out. Brittany Griner, on the other hand, was an American. She did not deliberately risk her life for the benefit of the anti-terrorism efforts. She has, of course, inspired many girls through her great basketball play. We sent back to Russia the merchant of death, Victor Bout, in order to get him out. In prior years, I've talked to your predecessors and suggested that we take Pakistan off on what may still or may or not still be on the table, and that is a trade of Siddiqui for Afridi. And they have assured me to be confident that we're going to get Dr. Afridi out without giving up Siddiqui. That confidence was obviously misplaced. Are we willing? Obviously, you're going to tell me that we'd like Afridi freed, and you got to be freed, and you can pound the table for emphasis. But are we willing to make sure Afridi gets out, and are we willing to take steps that are unpleasant in order to get him out?
So, of course, as you know, we are very concerned about Dr. Afridi. He is innocent, and we would like to get him out.
Are we willing to trade Siddiqui for Afridi, or are we willing to do anything else that's going to be more successful in the last decade of failure?
I can't answer your question on that now, but what I can promise you is to look into see what kind of creative solutions we might do to bring
Are you
Afridi home.
opposed to trading Siddiqui for Afridi?
I would have to look at the legal ramifications of that.
There are no. We let out Bout. We can, the president can let out anybody he wants.
It's the sort of thing that I would want to consult with my colleagues at DOJ, but I agree with you that we need to work to get Dr. Afridi home, Dr. Afridi out.
Nothing else other than a trade for Siddiqui is likely to work. Everything else that your many predecessors have said, which is almost exactly your words, has been a total failure, and we should not forget the 24th man. Let's see. Pakistan is supposed to have a Supreme Court that does have a Supreme Court that has ordered elections in one of its states. I believe it was Punjab. Those elections are not happening. There's supposed to be nationwide elections in October. What can we do to make sure that democracy really prevails and that the majority of Pakistani voters can vote for the prime minister and parliament of their choice?
So we have conveyed publicly and privately that we expect Pakistan to adhere to its constitution and laws, and we fully anticipate that there will be elections no later than November. It is something that is important to us, and we think that Pakistan has a democratic tradition it needs to follow.
Have we commented on the failure to have elections in Punjab, which were ordered by the court?
So this is a complicated, I'm by no means an expert on Pakistan, the Pakistan Constitution.
I hope we would comment. And finally, we need an Indian consulate in Los Angeles. We need an American consulate in Chandigarh. I know we're creating some other consulates. And we need to start seeing immigration visas processed in more than one place in India, perhaps like the embassy in Delhi, in addition to Mumbai. It is so important that we improve the visa and the passport process.
The gentleman's time has expired. Now I recognize Representative McCormick for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Ms. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses today for being here. The President's 2024 fiscal year budget requests includes $11.1 billion for the Department of State and USAID to outcompete China. However, because of the foreign policy failures of the Biden administration, in my opinion, countries throughout the Central and South Asia are becoming trapped by China's Belt and Road Initiative, this having far-reaching implications for the United States security policy in the region. For example, Pakistan owes nearly 1/3 of its foreign debt to China. In particular, troubled by recent Chinese buildup in the Ream naval bases in Cambodia and the creation of the Gwadar port in Pakistan, which have now been strengthened by the PRC's deterrence capabilities against the free navigation of the South Asia and Indo-Pacific waters. Really concerning, obviously, with those ports right there. We all know the PRC uses the debt trap program. And maybe the United States has some ancient investments in similar ways, but that's inconsequential right now. What we're seeing, China and its misbehavior is starting to warp that region right now. I'm really concerned about our priorities and how we're going to bolster the U.S. relationships with those countries, such as India, obviously being the most populous country in the region that has a similar constitution and similar outlooks on the world politics, and how we're going to evolve in those security changes. Specifically, I know you talked to Mr. Barr in his question, but it was kind of vague as far as our arms sales, how we link them, India to the West instead of to Russia. You said it was moving quickly, but didn't give any specifics. And I particularly want to know, what are the holdups that you were encountering? Because I've heard rumors about 51%. I know you want to, and what they want to have ownership of, and what is holding back that transition, especially with Ukraine going on right now, in which Russia really can't afford to sell arms to anywhere else right now. So this is the perfect time to transition them to a Western style and linked not only in their arms sales, but also in military exercises.
There was a lot in that question, so let me try and hit some of the things. So I think we've talked a little bit about what we're doing to counter China broadly across the region. Pakistan is increasingly in debt to China, and they know that, and they're in trouble, and I think they're seeing the consequences of this relationship. What are we doing about that? We are, again, trying to offer an alternative through a variety of tools that we have, but it's long-term. China didn't establish itself quickly, and we are doing the same in a long-term way. With regards to what India is doing and how we're trying to diversify, these are deals that are going on with private American companies, so I'm not at liberty to talk about the details, but we'd be happy to follow up with your staff as we are able to talk about what we're doing to make this move faster. Michael, you may want to add something.
Yeah, if I can just add to that briefly. You know, we are clear-eyed about the challenge that we face from the PRC and the nature of the competition and its implications for development diplomacy. That's why the administration has asked for the outcompete funds as well as robust resources across the Indo-Pacific and for Central Asia. As we've talked about earlier today, we're facing a clear demand signal in the region for the United States to show up, to have a certain trajectory, and to be an enduring partner. That's what we want to do. Those are the sorts of programs that USAID and state are seeking to develop so that we can provide an alternative and demonstrate that democracy delivers and that we have a better development model. We hope and look forward to working with this committee to make sure that we have the resources to be able to do that.
Great. I know we're going over there also on our own, Codell, to address this with India and other countries. We'll be in Bangladesh as well. We also just dropped the bill recently that would shore up India's longstanding claim to the Arunachal Pradesh region, as well as to dispute China's claims in Tibet and so forth. I guess I'm just looking at what the department itself can do to shore up these to strengthen these relationships that really lay a bulwark against China's aggression in those regions, policy or otherwise, that we can do to just kind of bolster our relationships to push back against that kind of aggression.
And we appreciate both what Congress' role is playing in helping strengthen our relationship with India. Prime Minister Modi's visit last month, I think, really demonstrated that we're in new territory with India in an exciting way, not just in the capital, but across the country.
Thank you. I now recognize Representative Connolly for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair, and I welcome our two witnesses. This is a budget hearing, so let's talk a little bit about the budget. The Appropriations Subcommittee on Foreign Ops and related programs cut $16.4 billion, or 24%, from the President's request. $7.2 billion, or 12%, below the enacted levels last year. I don't know. Could that have an impact on programs, Ms. Horst?
So the budget that we will make do with the budget that the President...
Ms. Horst, I didn't ask that. Could this have an impact on what you're planning and what you want to do and the objectives you set out? Because presumably you put a number to the President's request for a reason.
Correct. We did. Will it have an impact? Most likely, yes.
Most likely?
Yes, it will have an impact.
That's your answer? Oh, okay. So you're inviting Congress with that answer to cut 24% from the President's request. I don't know. I've been working on foreign aid for almost 50 years. I think it's unbelievable and potentially catastrophic. and I think it will most certainly hurt your programs. Mr. Schiffer, maybe it would hurt AID programs. Apparently, the State Department doesn't think so.
From an AID perspective, but really.
Could you speak up, please?
Certainly, my apologies. From an AID perspective, you know, we think that development diplomacy is the ground game for U.S.
I
national
know.
security.
Would 24% hurt your programs?
We think that the budget proposal that the president made is the necessary funding that we need to be able to.
It's not a very good answer when you have a whole bunch of people who are, you know, giving Torquemada a run for competition in slashing your budget. And I would suggest to both of you need a more robust response. In that budget, it only includes, with respect to climate change, money for biodiversity conservation. It actually prohibits funding for the Green Climate Fund and the Clean Technology Fund, and prohibits funding for any loss and damage claims attributed to climate change. I don't know, in your region, is it affected by climate change? Could those prohibitions affect what you do and how you respond to the manifestations of climate change?
I would offer that we always appreciate having the discretion to be able to face the problems that we see in the region. The administrator and other senior members of this administration have made very clear
Well, I know
the importance we put on climate
Let me
change.
suggest to you, Mr. Schiffer, I know the aid administrator. I think she'd have a more robust answer. I think she would decry an explicit prohibition because it will be harmful to the countries we serve in that region and make us even less competitive against the Chinese, whom we are concerned about. What about you, Ms. Horst? Prohibitions bother you, or are we just going to live with them?
We
Now
work.
remember, the Senate hasn't been heard from yet. Your answers can influence what happens in the other body that hopefully will be more enlightened than what happened in the Foreign Ops Subcommittee.
To echo what my colleague, Mr. Schiffer, has said, we work with the constraints that we're being given, but we also have found very creative ways to counter what's going on in climate in our
I would
region.
say to you both, the constraints are not given. This is a markup on the Foreign Ops Subcommittee. This is an opportunity for you to weigh in on whether those are wise decisions or you're just going to live with them. Could we move beyond the bureaucratic for a minute and actually talk about a budget policy that is evolving and that we can still shape, presumably to your advantage and that of the countries we serve?
Our view is that the budget proposal that the president has made.
Yeah, I know.
Right, but that is the
stipulate
budget
that.
we would urge
Are you going to
Congress to
defend
enact.
it?
We're
We will stipulate that that's what, you know, all wisdom went into that. This is a specific item.
I think you'll appreciate that you know, discretion can be the better you know, can be the better source of valor here. We obviously have you know, support what is in the president's budget proposal. That is what we would like to see Congress enact as proposed.
I'm sure you're both good people, but your answers are very weak and are not the kind of answers, not the kind of conviction we need in these programs if we're going to fend off the kinds of cuts that are being proposed that are almost unprecedented. And I urge you to take that spirit back. But this was not helpful. I yield back.
I now recognize Representative Lawler for 5 minutes.
Well, that was entertaining, and I commend the witnesses for not being led to state things that obviously you don't feel are true. And clearly, the talking points that get used are not reality. So thank you for actually holding your ground and not being led to say stupid things. Ms. Horst, is al-Qaeda in Afghanistan?
Pardon me. So we believe right now that al-Qaeda cannot use Afghanistan as a base from which to hit the United States.
No. I asked you a very specific question. Is al-Qaeda in Afghanistan?
That is something that I think I'd rather talk about in a more classified setting. A more general answer that I would want to talk about because of the nature of intel and some of our counterterrorism work that we're doing.
On June 30th, when the administration tried to whitewash the Afghanistan withdrawal by releasing the report on the July 4th holiday weekend, President Biden was asked about the report, and he stated that al-Qaeda is gone from Afghanistan. Do you agree with the president's statement that al-Qaeda is gone from Afghanistan?
I would not contradict the president.
So you are stating for the record that al-Qaeda is not in Afghanistan?
What I'm stating for the record is that we no longer believe that Afghanistan is a base from which al-Qaeda can threaten the homeland.
Not what I'm asking. You just said on the record that you will not contradict the president. The president said al-Qaeda is gone from Afghanistan. Are you stating for the record that al-Qaeda is gone from Afghanistan, i.e. no longer there in Afghanistan?
That is not what I'm stating. I am stating that I don't think that Afghanistan is a threat, that al-Qaeda can pose a threat to the United States from Afghanistan. And when it does, as we saw in the example from al-Zawahiri, we are willing to go in and unilaterally take care of that threat.
Do you agree with the president that the Taliban are helping the United States?
I think that the Taliban, we are carefully monitoring to see whether the Taliban are living up to their commitments when it comes to counterterrorism. And again, when we think that they are not, we are going in on our own.
Do you agree with the president that the Taliban are helping the United States?
I think that the Taliban have understand what their obligations are to us.
So when they bar female aid implementors from working, is that part of their obligations to us? You think they're helping us?
We've been very clear with the Taliban that what they're doing with women and girls is absolutely abhorrent. We have made it clear that any kind of normalization with the Taliban depends on them allowing 50% of their country to be participating in public life in this sphere. So we've been very clear.
If what they're doing with women is abhorrent, what exactly are they doing that's helping us?
I did not say that the Taliban were helping us.
Okay, so you disagree with the president's comments that the Taliban are helping the United States.
What I would
Thank you. And I would just note, last month, the United Nations Sanctions Monitoring Team reported that the Taliban has appointed at least 3 al-Qaeda members to senior government positions. The Taliban pays al-Qaeda monthly, quote-unquote, welfare payments. Al-Qaeda is operating at least 6 training facilities in Afghanistan, including one specifically dedicated to training suicide bombers, and the Taliban uses al-Qaeda manuals to train their security forces. So again, I ask you, do you agree with the president that al-Qaeda is gone from Afghanistan and that the Taliban are helping the United States? And therefore, is the UN Sanctions Monitoring Team lying when they released this report? Or do you disagree with what the president stated publicly?
I would let the UN sanctions, the UN monitoring team report stand on its own, and again come back to my point that we carefully monitor what is a threat to the United States.
Okay, so do you agree with the UN Sanctions Monitoring Team report?
I would need to read it more in detail. I will frankly tell you that I need to read it more in detail before I could tell you whether I agree or not. Do not agree.
Okay, I would just state for the record, it is clear that when the president said that al-Qaeda is gone and that the Taliban are helping us, that was a lie. It's not true. And the UN Sanctions Monitoring Team's report does stand on its own and should be believed by the administration, and the administration should take it seriously. I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize Representative Castro for 5 minutes.
Thank you. The administration's Indo-Pacific strategy recognizes the importance of both the Pacific and Indian Oceans to U.S. interests. How do you define what U.S. interests are in the Indian Ocean region, and what are U.S. security and economic interests there? And also, can you break down for me what in the President's budget request for FY24 is specific to the Indian Ocean in the context of the Indo-Pacific?
Sure. Thank you for that question, Congressman. I would say at the broadest level, our interests are in working with partners in the region to build strong and prosperous societies that are able to grow their economies and able to develop strong, vibrant civil societies and democratic institutions of governance. societies and countries that can contribute to the rules-based international order and work with us to solve common problems, including the problem of climate change. So at a most general level, that is what we seek to do. In terms of the Indian Ocean specific breakdown, I will have to pull into that and get back to you, and we will follow up on that.
Yeah, I would just underscore that our principles there are about interconnectivity and diversification, and we're using a number of tools, both on the economic side and the political side, as well as on the security side, to make sure that an Indo-Pacific region that's free and market-oriented and secure is our ultimate goal.
And back in 2016, Congress and the Obama administration designated India as a, quote, major defense partner. And terms like treaty ally and major non-NATO ally are well defined in U.S. policy and come with specific commitments and privileges, whereas major defense partner is an evolving concept. And what does major defense partner mean to the Biden administration and the U.S.-India relationship, and how does it specifically set India apart?
We saw with Prime Minister Modi's visit last month that defense and security is becoming an increasing important part of our relationship with India. And so the term major defense partner reflects just that we are trying to increase co-production, that we're looking for ways that we can coordinate on maritime domain awareness and other areas and truly expand the partnership beyond where it has been in the past.
And then finally, there's been considerable debate, especially during Prime Minister Modi's state visit to the United States last month, on whether the United States' bet on India has been worth it, particularly when it comes to whether India will align with the United States on Indo-Pacific security issues. What does the bet on India mean for you? And what are our expectations from India on alignment on these security issues?
So the bet on India, if you've read the national security strategy, is very clear that we see India as being central to our Indo-Pacific strategy. And what that means is the two biggest democracies in the world are working together to make the region more secure. That is it fundamentally, I think.
And I will offer from a USAID perspective, I think we see a significant opportunity, and Prime Minister Modi's visit really captured a lot of energy around this to take our development diplomacy partnership with India to the next stage so that we're no longer just working in India, but we're working with and through India to provide public goods to the region and to construct that free and open Indo-Pacific order that we are seeking to support.
All right, thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Castro, did you yield back the balance of your time? Oh, thank you. I now recognize Representative Manning for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I'll continue the discussion of India that my colleague started. And Ms. Horst, there is no question that our relationship with India, the world's most populous democracy, is critically important, particularly in light of our changing and challenging relationship with China. And you have both referenced the visit of Prime Minister Modi and the importance of that relationship. But I'd like to raise an issue that is particularly distressing, but is rarely discussed, and that is the well-known problem of and culture of gang rape and other instances of sexual and physical violence against women in India. And I'd like to submit for the record a recent article about the culture of gang rape, the impact it has on Indian women, and the persistence of this problem and the failure of the government to deal with that problem. You've both talked about the importance of human rights and the importance of equality, particularly gender equality. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what, if anything, the SCA is doing to address this problem, to make sure the perpetrators are held accountable, to change the attitude toward gang rape, and to improve gender equality overall.
So thank you for highlighting a problem that is just gut-wrenching when you dig into it. The United States has worked with India on a number of issues, including human rights and gender rights. We have the U.S.-India Women's Alliance, which is an umbrella organization that highlights a number of things we're doing to promote women economic empowerment and women's rights, gender equality issues. This is something we had what was called the Shatter Summit that was hosted here a few months ago that exemplified what the United States and India can do together to look at these issues of discrimination against women. We also work on some basic things like rule of law and democracy programs. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking at when we look at this terrible problem, and I'm going to turn to my colleague at USAID for some of the specifics on what we're doing on his side of the house.
Sure, thank you, and thank you for raising this very important issue. We work with our partners in India to provide counseling for victims of gender-based violence. We work with our partners in civil society in India to address the broader context in which these activities take place. And we also work, as Secretary Horst pointed to make sure that we are supporting programs that will empower women economically, politically, socially, so that we can advance, their state and their status in Indian society.
I'm delighted to hear you're working with the women, but they don't seem to be the problem. It's the men who are the problem. So what are you doing to work with the men, work with the cultural issue, and work with the government?
Well, I mean, the gender-based violence counseling that we do, for example, and the groups that we support that provide those services, that's not just for women. That is a broader effort that includes both men and women. And frankly, we also work, as you know, on promoting issues related to the entire spectrum of the LGBTQI community, because this issue of gender-based violence is one that cuts across all of the full range of vulnerable communities. So this is something that, as I know you appreciate and understand, requires a certain amount of cultural delicacy and sensitivity, but it is one that we are paying a lot of attention to.
Ms. Horst, you look like you have something else to say on this issue.
I was just going to note, within the context of what we're doing to combat trafficking in persons, we also work on the prevention and prosecution side with the Indian government across India and have been eager to partner with them to see what they can do to strengthen that aspect of it, both prosecution and protection.
I would just like to encourage, as our relationship with India deepens, as we look at them as a more important ally, that this issue be raised on a governmental basis. There have been many articles about gang rapists who were convicted and then released after a very short amount of time, not serving anything close to their prison term, and paraded around the country. So my time is expiring, and I yield back.
Thank you. We have now come to the end of our hearing. So I want to thank Ms. Holst and Mr. Schiffer for your valuable testimony. And I also thank my colleagues and members for their questions. The members of the subcommittees may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we ask you to respond to those in writing. Pursuant to committee rules, all members may have 5 days to submit questions, statements, and extraneous materials for the record, subject to the length limitations. And without objection, the subcommittees will now stand adjourned.